Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday ACT. I'm Kristin from Magoosh, and today we are talking about complex numbers or imaginary numbers. Now, imaginary numbers are kind of like the imaginary friends of the math world. It takes a little bit of a leap of faith to feel like they're real and to make them act like they're real, but they're pretty cool once you're used to dealing with them. So this is an imaginary number. It's I. And here's basically what I means. I is the square root of -1. Now, before you probably study complex numbers in math class, your teacher is probably like, you can't take the square root of a negative number. But just like when your mom said your imaginary friend Bob wasn't real, you're like, no, Bob is real. You can take the square root of a negative number, kind of, if you use imaginary numbers. So now you have that power once you learned about imaginary numbers. So let's talk about what you need to know about these cool magical numbers for the ACT. All right, so let's say you have something like radical -4. So let's talk about simplifying complex numbers first. All right, so if we had the radical of -4, that'd be the same thing as having the square root of -1 times the square root of 4. So we can simplify square root of 4 pretty easily. That's 2. And now knowing about imaginary numbers, we can call that I. And so simplified, this would be 2I. So that's basically what 2I means. All right, let's talk about the powers of I. This is also something really important you need to know for the ACT. What if you saw this question, what is I squared? All right, don't panic, we just need to kind of think through this. So I squared would be the same thing as I times I, right? And now that we know that I means the square root of -1, we can write that out as the square root of -1 times the square root of -1. If we combine that, then we have the square root of -1 squared. And just like if you saw the square root of 2 squared, you know that the square root and that squared cancel each other out basically, and we're just left with -1. So I squared equals -1. Now, I'm going to go through a couple more quick examples here, and then we're going to talk about the pattern for how you can remember what different powers of I mean without having to actually go through this whole process. All right, so I to the third. Well, that would be the same thing as I squared times I. And so jumping off of our previous example, that would be the same thing as the square root of -I squared times I. We know that that equals -1, and this is just I. So I to the third is -1. All right, one more example. What is I to the fourth? I to the fourth is I squared times I squared, right? And we determined that that's -1. So it's -1 times -1, which equals 1. After you get past I to the 4, you're going to see that the pattern repeats itself. And you could keep working it out if you want, or there's an easier way to remember this pattern. And here it is. So I to the 1, we determined it's basically I, the same thing. And I squared is -1, I to the third is -I, and I to the fourth is I. Here's a little mnemonic that can help you out if you like it. Just think I1, 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 I1 over and over and over again. And then you're like, wait, how do I remember about the negative signs? Well, just remember you gotta bury the negative deep down inside. So the negative signs are in the middle. That's not good advice for life, but it's good advice for remembering complex numbers. So make sure those negatives are on the inside of the pattern. All right, so let's say you saw the question, what is I to the 47? You don't need to break it all down and figure it all out if you know the pattern. So we need to figure out where the closest multiple of 4 is underneath that, or which is the closest number that divides evenly by 4. And that would be 44. So basically we're just getting rid of that. The pattern completely repeats itself there, and we just have to worry about 45, 46, 47. So we're looking for the third term in the pattern. So basically the same thing as I to the third. So remember I1, I1. So the third one would be I. Remember, you keep those negative, bury that negative deep down inside. So it's going to be -I. And you'll see questions like this on the ACT, so it's good to be prepared for that. So that's all about simplifying imaginary numbers and the powers of imaginary numbers. We'll talk more later on in another video about how to multiply and do other things with these. So for more on that and lots of other tips for the ACT, you can join me next week for another episode of Tuesday ACT.